Hey, everybody. Here's what we got for the podcast today. How often has your partner or somebody else asked you what you experience inside your brain from, fantasy to, hey, who are you looking at? And you find yourself confused. How do I articulate this? How much do I tell them? What do I tell them? We're going to go through that today. Give you some language for it. Welcome to Beyond the Facade podcast. I'm your host, Luke Gordon, and I'm thrilled to have you join me in this space today. What we're going to be doing is diving deep into the trials and triumphs and truths of seeking authenticity. Becoming your true self isn't about a single action or moment. It's a relentless pursuit, a commitment to self that reveals the rich connection and meaning that our life has to offer. So whether this is your first time tuning in or you're a regular listener, know this: what you're building here goes beyond a conversation. You're here to challenge, to change, and to celebrate the incredible journey of becoming your authentic self. Because when you dare to show up fully, the rewards are immeasurable. So welcome to Beyond the Facade. Let's get started. Okay, don't turn off the podcast yet. I'm going to give you the name of it, and I don't know if it'll be that exciting, but I'm telling you, if you hang on, there'll be some good meat here. But we're going to talk about the neuroscience, the brain, and the sexual response. So we're going to talk about the spectrum from noticing to fantasy and beyond. Sounds like a Star Trek episode. Okay, so I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. When D-Day happens and your partner finds out about a bunch of hiding and they say, hey, tell me more. I want to know about what you experienced. I think the question that I have, or people have often, is how much do I share and what do I share? And I go, well, before we get to that part, I kind of have to know what is it that you're experiencing. Before you start telling people what you're experiencing, do you know what you're experiencing? So I'm going to give you 6 levels or a spectrum from noticing to fantasy and beyond, okay? So let me just say them real quick and then we'll go through them. So the first stage is, it's the initial noticing. It's the stimulus response. So it's the automatic brain response of I see something, okay? And then you have the second level, which is awareness and acknowledgement. That's like the conscious noticing. I noticed it subconsciously, now I actually notice it. And then the next level is interest and engagement. So this is where the decision point lines. This is where dopamine gets involved. Then you have the fourth one, which is cognitive engagement. So that's the mental storytelling. This is where fantasy actually is, all right? And then we have the fifth one, which is fixation and obsession. So this is where like the loss of the agency, the loss of choice is going to start to happen. This is where habits are formed. And then you have the sixth one, which is like the compulsive acting out. That's where your reward system's hijacked, all right? Okay, so let's break these down even further, because you're like, Luke, that was fast. But let's talk about examples and what's actually going on behind each one of these. And again, the reason is so I can articulate, I can understand it for myself, and I can understand how it impacts me and what my patterns are in it. And then I can articulate it to somebody else. And then I know the question I was asking is what's normal? And in fact, kind of embarrassing, feels like now, but I was asking, one of the first questions I asked a therapist was, how does a normal man's brain work? And yeah, we're going to talk about that. All right, because I didn't feel normal, not with what I did. All right, so first one is that stimulus SAS perception. If you're the betrayed partner, if the other person has been hurt, this can be really, really triggering. And I just want to acknowledge that. And please don't go to your partner and say, hey, guess what Luke said, and I'm normal, and you weaponize it and use it against them. Okay, so just be careful with that. So the first one, it's an automatic response to notice, okay? So the brain region that's involved here is the visual cortex, the amygdala, right? So I see something, I see someone, and there's quickly a filter of sensory input, and that sends visual information, and there's some processing done around it. And the amygdala, which is responsible for that emotional piece that detects whether there's stimulus relevant, there's stimulus there. And this happens before conscious thoughts. You're automatically noticing. This is biological. It's evolutionary response. Noticing isn't a choice, but don't weaponize that against your partner, because this is not a pass, because there's levels deeper we're getting to right now, all right? So the next level is this awareness and acknowledgement. So it's that conscious noticing. It's that prefrontal cortex weighs in, okay? The anterior cingulate cortex, just to make myself sound super cool, I'm joking, is involved. So our brain notices attraction, I won't even use the word attraction, notices stimuli, and that prefrontal cortex steps in. And it decides what to do with that stimulus. And remember, it's not just stimulus around, it's like sexual stimulus. It's like, am I safe? Am I okay? Because our brain's always doing that. And so the thing is do I keep thinking about this or do I let it go? So the more someone practices awareness of themselves, the stronger this part of their brain gets. So that prefrontal cortex becomes regulating thoughts. We're going to take a quick break for a moment. I want to let you know of some things that we have coming up at Choose Recovery Services. I'm very excited to tell you about the Unmasked Intensive we have coming up in May. It's May 13th through the 16th in Spanish Fork, Utah. The name of the intensive is Unmasked Paths to Authentic Masculinity. Let me tell you some of the things we're going to accomplish. We're going to explore some root causes, like at the end of the day, what's underneath this behavior? What's the why behind it? What's the insights into understanding why my behavior existed, the one that kept me in secrecy and hiding? We're going to embrace vulnerability. So we're going to confront a lot of the struggles of that non-judgmental space so you can foster more authentic connections with the people that you love. We're going to realign with your values. We're going to learn new coping strategies, and we're going to forge some authentic connection. We're going to build a lot of camaraderie to hear that happens. I wanted to share with you what previous participants have said about this transformation. So here's what one guy said. I'm just going to read it to you. I loved the connection with those around me. It was eye-opening to learn how to open up and show love for myself and be okay with what's going on inside of me, no matter how hard or ugly I may see it. I specifically remember this man saying this and just being astounded by like, wow, if I'm around people that really open up, what can I explore and learn about myself? In this intensive, he found it to be really eye-opening. So anyway, for more information and reserve your spot, go ahead and visit our website and we'll provide some information for you. And then take the time to invest in yourself so you can start to lean in a more authentic way in your life. Looking forward to seeing you there. Let's get back to our episode. So check this out. Now we get to that third part, which is the interest and the engagement. So that's the decision point. All right. So this is where a decision is made because dopamine begins to activate. So the brain regions that are involved here is the nucleus accumbens. And if attraction persists and that stimuli persists, the dopamine system activates. So it lights up, right? And dopamine is that motivation, that's anticipation that something as good is going to happen. So that's going to bring a bunch of pleasure. And then we're going to start going, is this rewarding? So what we do is we notice is that attraction or that stimuli alone doesn't create addiction. However, if a person repeats in that over and over again, that objectification or that fantasy, the brain reinforces that. And that's that next piece. But before we go to the next piece, we have to notice that dopamine hits right here. Okay. This is where it starts. And that's the start of the addictive process. If I don't notice that, so what men do in our groups, they've been kind of taught to suppress emotion, feelings, not notice them, fix them. Instead, we're going to create awareness around them of, oh, I feel something. I feel that. What is that? To get curious about what they're feeling. And that's going to continue in a human experience compared to an animalistic survival mechanism. So fourth level, cognitive engagement. This is the mental storytelling and fantasy. This is impactful to me, and maybe it's a soapboxish, and I know, but I feel so much for our partners that we hurt, so much, because they think fantasy is like the first step, and it's the fourth. This is the default mode network that takes over. So our brain is like a person's allowed attraction to grow in a fantasy. Okay, so this was not the first step. Fantasy wasn't. And it pulls in all these past experiences, creating an elaborate narrative. And the longer fantasy continues, the stronger the natural connection becomes. So this is the rewiring based upon these repeated patterns. So fantasy isn't dangerous because it's somebody else that's not your partner, or maybe it is even your partner. It's the fact that you're not in reality anymore. And it's creating this false narrative that what reality actually is, that it's not. And it's rewiring your brain in that way. So it's ingrained and it's automatic. And by the way, you can't just like wire or rewire your brain quickly. It takes a long time to fall into patterns. I'll say this really quick. That's why we have to be really careful to label addiction in childhood, is because you don't just get addicted quickly. It takes a while for those things to come into play. So often we give that addict label to somebody too early in those patterns. I feel like I could just trigger a bunch of people with that. So I'm going to leave that alone. I'm just saying, be careful with the label, because if I'm going to rewire my brain, it's going to take a long time. Okay. And it doesn't mean we can't have a predisposition to be prone to be susceptible to something. Just remember, either way, it takes a while for those patterns to rewire our brain. Okay, so then you have the next stage, which is fixation and obsession. This is the loss of agency. This is where that habit loop forms. This is where the dopamine pathways, the brain regions involved, is the basal ganglia. So if someone repeatedly engages in fantasy, that part of our brain that governs that habit information locks in that pattern. So that brain begins to seek that dopamine spikes. So now that's the purpose. The dopamine is the purpose. It reinforces that compulsive behavior. That's what I need. Now it's not about something sexual. It's like, I want sex is that I want to survive. I want to cope. And it's become a way of living. So habits are formed our brains are plastic. It's neuroplasticity. It's repeated. It's pattern-based. So what do? We identify the patterns and we disrupt them. And we do that through awareness and alternative responses. Then the last piece, and this is, I don't want to say pointless to talk about, but it's kind of pointless to talk about. The compulsive acting out, the part that, this is the part that we lost control. This is where we're on autopilot. We're gone. The reward system's hijacked. We're offline. If fantasy escalates into compulsive behavior, that governs our impulse control. There's those weaknesses. Our ability to be able to assess consequences it's so overruled by our dopamine cravings. That's what partners ask, is how could he do this to me? How could he hurt me? It's because it's been hijacked and overruled, and the dopamine cravings become the most important thing. It's tied to survival. So that amygdala heightens that emotional reaction, making that behavior feel like it's an urgent need. Patrick Carnes talks about the 4 faulty core beliefs of an addict, and one of them being, if I don't have my drug of choice, I'll die. So if I don't have that was an exact quote, by the way, I'm paraphrasing, but it's intense like that. If I don't get that met, I'll die. This is an urgent need. So in addiction, that dopamine system is hijacked, making it feel like that behavior is necessary rather than optional. Okay. Necessary rather than optional. When we talk about how to rewire the brain, if we think about Choose Recovery Services in our phase 1 groups, we talk about the neuroscience behind it. We do that mindful noticing. We do that being mindfulness, helping our brain pause and react. Inside of those groups, we go through strengthening that prefrontal cortex, increasing that, setting fair expectations of what change actually looks like, learning what healthy levels of dopamine are, diverting away from empty calorie dopamine to enriching dopamine, learning the pain associated with it has purpose. And then that's that cognitive restructuring. We weaken the fantasy pathway, right? And there's a community that holds us accountable to it. We strengthen ourselves socially, our brain, and then that gives us that new sense of hope. And then we share that with our partners throughout that journey. We share that with people we love, and the rewiring of the brain, not giving them false sense of hope of the pain. This was so bad that I got caught. I never want to do this again. Trying to give them hope based upon that. It's that slow rewiring process. So anyway, just wanted to share with you that neuroscience of sexual response, that spectrum from noticing to fantasy and beyond. So please take that journey. Know what yours looks like. Don't do it alone. Do it in a group. Do it with a therapist. Do it with a coach. Seek to understand what your spectrum looks like and how to articulate it and how to understand and seek those patterns. Thanks for spending some time with me.
Hi, my name is Hallie Roderick with Choose Recovery Services. And if you're a woman healing from betrayal trauma and you find yourself feeling stuck or experiencing overwhelming triggers, having a difficult time trusting yourself, or even thinking about trusting others, or having a hard time understanding what healthy boundaries are, how to hold those, I want to invite you to consider joining us at our upcoming Courage to Thrive Intensive, held on April 23rd through 26th in Spanish Fork, Utah. These intensives are one of my favorite things to be a part of because healing happens in community. There's just something different that happens when you're in person with other women who maybe your stories aren't exactly the same, but there's a mutual understanding and a safety that is created by being in a common community. So if this sounds like something that would be beneficial to you, please check the show notes, reach out to our office to get more information, and come see us in Utah on April 23rd through 26th. We'd love to have you join us.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. If this is something that you connected with, I'd love to meet with you more and talk about it. So what you can do is go to chooserecoveryservices.com or check the show notes. And there what we can do is set up a quick conversation to meet. Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Facade, where we unmask the authentic self.